What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the extended cut, minimally edited podcast version of this week's episode. I have just been enjoying focusing a little bit more on scripting the podcast portion of each of these episodes more and more each week. And so this week I'm going to have a lot of anecdotes sprinkled into the extended cut version of this week's episode compared to my typical YouTube video. So I'm looking forward to that. I decided to switch it up and film from my couch today. Those of you who are just listening don't see that I'm sitting at my couch, or if you're watching the extended video version, then you see me here. Hello. I missed sitting on my couch. I guess if I'm referencing my computer a lot, I don't know, I sit at my desk. Anyway, it's good to be here. So in this week's episode, I thought I would attempt to tackle this question: is it okay to specialize in things that you relate to? This is a big topic. It's super nuanced, so I'm glad you're here for the podcast version because you're going to get to catch all the nuance that I want to share about this topic, and I'm sure there's so much more that I'm not even going to get to, but hopefully I can at least start to insert some of the nuance into the conversation. If you're considering specializing in something that you personally have a connection with, then hopefully some of the things I offer in this video can help you know what to consider to kind of come to a conclusion yourself. When somebody is asking for advice with their private practice, their niche specialty, often I'll ask them, is there some area that you personally would love to specialize in? And it's not uncommon for folks to have an eager, excited response of a very specific area that they're so excited about. And part of the reason why they're so excited about it is because they have some kind of personal connection to it. But then after they kind of go through all their excitement and share that, they go, but is that okay? Like, can I specialize in something I have such a close personal tie to? And it is such a legitimate question to ask, of course. I think we all should ask that question if we're thinking of specializing in something we have such a close personal connection with. And just because we have a personal tie or personal experience with something does not automatically disqualify us from specializing in that area. And as we're going to talk about, sometimes it can really enhance the therapeutic relationship if there is some sort of personal connection to the topic. There are different categories of personal connection to a particular topic, specialty, experience. It could be that you have a close tie to someone who's gone through a certain kind of experience. An example of this would be if, let's say, you grew up with a parent who abused substances and now you specialize in substance use treatments, right? You didn't personally abuse substances yourself, but you have a very personal tie to that experience. Another example would be treating a condition that you personally experienced in your past, though maybe you've moved through it. My experience starting off in private practice is a great example of this, where in high school I developed a severe panic disorder, moved through CBT, systematic desensitization, etc. And by the time I became a therapist, I'd been symptom-free of panic disorder for years and years. And when I started my private practice, that is exactly what I specialized in. So that's an example of having a direct tie to an experience, but it's something you've already moved through and past. And then the last category of connection that I think of is when you help treat folks going through something that you right now are still going through as well. Now, if you're considering specializing in something that you're very much still going through actively right now, then I do think it deserves a little extra special consideration and attention, a little extra scrutiny before making it your specialty. It does not inherently make it a bad idea or an unethical one or anything like that. It may still be a fantastic idea, really just depending on the situation. Of course, there's a huge spectrum of things that fit in this category of, supporting folks going through something that you are actively going through right now. I mean, it could be something as benign potentially as, you have a diagnosis of ADHD, maybe it's well managed, etc., and you love treating folks who also share a diagnosis of ADHD, all the way to, you treat folks who are dealing with active substance use and you personally are dealing with active substance use, which, listen, I'm not the authority on is it okay or not, but I think it goes without saying that there's a lot that could go wrong if we are not using a bit of scrutiny before we dive into naming something as a specialty if it's something we're actively dealing with ourselves. So we're definitely going to talk more in this episode about what some of those things are you should think through before specializing in something you have a personal connection with, including if you are currently still going through the thing that you want to specialize in. Okay, all of that prefacing jibber jabber out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into some things to consider before specializing in something you have a very personal connection with. I think a valuable first question to start with is to ask, what are your reasons for wanting to specialize in this area? I think the answer to this question is going to be really informative throughout the rest of this discerning type process when deciding if you should specialize in this area. And of course, as is true with almost everything, there's likely a multi-layered, multifaceted answer to this question, and that's a good thing. However, if somehow you reflect on this question of why you want to specialize in this area you have a personal connection with, if your primary motivator is because you are seeking your own healing, that might be a good moment to pause and seek some consultation, maybe even some personal therapy. Make sure you're not leaning primarily into your own healing process by specializing in an area. I think a lot of people giving advice on this topic will stop right there and not add in some of the nuance where I personally believe that helping other people go through things that we've had a personal connection with is inherently healing. Like if you are going into a specialty you have a personal tie with and you feel like you're not allowed to experience any of your own growth or healing in the work that you do with your clients, I think that's just a little bit ridiculous. I personally experience so much healing in seeing my clients move through things that I've had shared experiences around. Maybe I see them be more resilient than I am or arrive at places in their journey that I didn't get to arrive at or sooner, or just all kinds of inspiring scenarios, or even if they go through a never-ending round of challenges, to be able to feel like I can, at the very least, offer some support to somebody else who's going through something that I went through. I can see what they're going through. I can kind of hold their hand metaphorically through this thing, can be incredibly healing for me. So I think it's incredibly healthy to be open to whatever healing we might be able to receive from the work that we do, regardless of whether we have a personal tie to our specialty or not. Like I learn from my clients all the time. Just people are incredibly inspirational, and I think it makes sense for us to learn and grow from the work that we're doing with our clients, even though our primary reason for being there is for us to support them. And that's a critical piece that we want to parse out with this question. Why are you wanting to specialize in this area? For me personally, almost everything I've ever specialized in has had some amount of tie to my own personal experience, and even private practice skills is also very much tied to my personal experience. And I notice a motivator for Marie to do things in life in general, not just as a therapist, but just across the board, is like, how do I help other people go through things more smoothly, less alone, more validated, more supported than when I went through some of those things? So that applies to, helping walk clients through a diagnosis of panic disorder and having a much more supportive environment than what it was like for me to have to figure it out by myself as a 14-year-old reading books in the library. Or, now focusing on things like faith deconstruction or feeling marginalized or ostracized from the church. Like, been there, done that, and can I help other people feel less alone and more supported as they go through that themselves? Or private practice skills, at least when I started this thing in 2018, was all about helping people have the tools to start their private practice that I didn't have when I started my private practice. Can I make this a little bit easier and smoother for folks than it was for me? So I know that about myself. If I'm motivated to do something, there's probably some storyline in my head about how I want to make it better for other people than whatever I experienced. And that tends to be my motivator for whatever specialty I'm interested in. And it's helpful to know what some of your primary motivators are to see, is that healthy? Another important thing to ask is how triggered you get by this topic. Certainly, if you enter a full-blown panic attack anytime you hear somebody even mention the topic that you have some personal tie with, at least today, that's probably not the thing for you to specialize in, because we don't want a situation where you don't have the bandwidth, emotional capacity, clarity, all of those things to be there with your client. So if you're finding that you're still rather triggered physiologically by a topic, definitely seek consultation. Push the pause button before you make something your specialty. Now, all of that said, I don't want to somehow convey that we're not allowed to have any sort of physiological reaction to topics that our clients go through. I mean, I feel, the anger and my heart rate go up or things like that when injustices happen towards my clients that I feel a personal connection to as well, or even things that I haven't personally gone through, but I have a kind of shared sense of righteous anger to say, oh my goodness, that should not have happened to you. So being able to connect even on the physiological level with our clients can be quite helpful. So I personally think it's more helpful to discern how that activated state affects you. How intense does it get? Are you able to still access a sense of I'm thinking of that term wise mind from DBT, right? Where you're able to say, I see you emotions, I see you physiological arousal, and I see you rational mind. We're okay. I'm still here. There's a groundedness, and you can still fully be present to whatever your client might be needing. And it's not about like, oh no, I don't feel good. I need to get out. I need to dissociate, or whatever it might be. If you tend towards that kind of reaction with this topic where you start to dissociate, or you're not able to tend towards your client's needs or even see your client's needs clearly, then perhaps it's not quite time, at least yet, to broach this topic. Another question to ask before naming something as a specialty is, what are your automatic thoughts that you have related to this experience, right? So we're kind of balancing out. We just talked about what are your emotional reactions, and now we're asking what are your thought reactions to this kind of experience. Of course, we all have automatic thoughts about pretty much everything. But if you have a personal tie to experience, whether it's a loved one who's gone through something or you've gone through something yourself, do you have kind of automatic beliefs, potentially negative or harmful, shameful, frustrating beliefs about the situation or a type of person who goes through something? And how much of a hold do those automatic thoughts have? So again, we don't want to judge the presence of automatic thoughts because we all have them, but I think it's far more helpful to identify what the automatic thoughts are, how much of a hold they have, how open-minded are you to seeing things from different perspectives, different angles, so that you don't have to fully latch on to whatever that automatic thought is. So just to kind of name an example to paint a picture of what I mean, let's pretend that, back in my panic disorder days, I had an automatic belief towards myself that this isn't a real problem. Like, Marie, you should be able to figure this out. This is quite simple. This is your issue, right? And if I carried that automatic thought, automatic belief with me, even after, I was no longer meeting criteria for that diagnosis, I could very easily project that same belief on a client experiencing their own diagnosis of panic disorder, which is incredibly terrifying. And even if we are able to separate keeping the belief in our head and the words coming out of our mouth are something that sounds more supportive, I do think if we're not able to toggle that belief or release it in the moment from our own selves, then it does start to bleed through in our work together. So it's really helpful to identify automatic thoughts like that and see if we're able to release them, or if they're so intense that they kind of drive our internal narrative about someone's experience. And I'll say too, sometimes your automatic thoughts might be quite supportive. Like, some things that I went through in the past that I now specialize in, I look back on my own journey in the past, and even though it was so hard at the time and maybe I carried so much shame at the time, now looking back, I think like, wow, Marie, like, you were so resilient. Like, you pushed through. I'm so proud of you. And so my future self, being able to look at my past self with a sense of pride, is also a category of automatic thought, or maybe there's emotion in there. Sometimes I get those things mixed up. But we might be able to then also project that on our clients as well, where maybe they're still in that, shame-filled phase or in the depths of the challenge, and you're able to kind of be outside of their situation, imagine their future self where they're no longer in this state where they might be able to look back at themselves in the past and say, oh my goodness, I'm so proud of myself for what I did here. And that can be incredibly powerful to offer to our clients. So the automatic thoughts are not inherently damaging. It's just really helpful to identify what those are and our ability to kind of toggle different perspectives other than the one that we automatically hold. Another question to consider is, are you open to the array of potential healthy outcomes that might be the best fit for your client? In other words, are you open to your clients having a very different outcome than whatever you personally went through that you think was the ideal outcome or that you've come to develop as the ideal outcome for your situation? Because whatever was most healthy for you or your loved one may not be what's most healthy for the client sitting in front of you. And I do see this happen quite a bit. I've seen this happen in my own personal therapist that I did not stick with, and this is one of the reasons why I wouldn't stick with a therapist as a client. If you've been through something and you found something that really, really worked for you, then it can be so easy to latch on and say, this is the way to deal with this situation that you're also going through because it worked for me. And I think if we overly latch on to whether it's a treatment plan or an approach or even things like, do you do meds versus talk therapy or any, do we treat this with EMDR versus, you could imagine the different scenarios where someone might latch on to like, this is the only way and project it onto their clients when maybe that's not the best way for your client or just not a way that they want to choose. And so ask yourself, am I open to the array of routes that are available that can lead my clients to a healthy outcome and a healthy outcome for them, which might look different than a healthy outcome for you? Okay. I feel like I got a little preachy there. But it's just because I do have a personal tie to that one. It so bugs me when a therapist says there's only one way to think. Oh, it's so closed-minded. So let's embrace open-mindedness when we can. Okay, now that I've said all that, I realize it's important that I kind of go back and add this caveat that no matter what we specialize in, no matter how connected we are with that experience, it's so important to stay connected with whatever available evidence and research we have about what is successful with a particular experience, issue, problem, etc. So definitely be familiar with what effective treatments are, effective approaches are, because yes, some are more effective for certain situations than others, and some can actually be harmful if applied in the wrong situation. So just include all of that knowledge when you're reflecting on how open you are to the array of potential routes a client can take to move towards health. Another important thing to ask is, how would you respond in the situations where your clients don't improve or they don't improve in the ways that you'd hoped? Of course, hands down, 100%, all of us hope and desire for our clients to improve. Otherwise, what the heck are we doing here? But inevitably, some clients may not improve, and it's important to be able to have space for that as well. So when we have a personal tie to a situation and we work with a client dealing with the same thing, if they don't improve, sometimes it can be painful in a unique kind of way. So it's important to just reflect on how would I do with that if my client didn't improve, given that I'd be treating them for something that I've personally have a connection with myself. As you ask this question, if you do identify that it really feels like you need your clients to improve in order to, be okay, feel like you're a good therapist or whatever it might be, you need every single client to improve, then I definitely encourage you to pause a bit longer, seek consultation, etc., before diving into this as a specialty. And another thing to consider is, how might potential clients perceive your unique vantage point? Would they see it as supportive? Would they see it as detrimental? Of course, you don't have to disclose any potential connections you might have to what you specialize in, but it's still helpful to ask this question. Like, if clients knew that I went through the same thing, or someone close to me has gone through the same thing, would that feel validating and trust building? Would it potentially feel detrimental? and just have that all available in mind and take it into consideration. Again, this doesn't need to be the thing that makes you say yes or no to a specialty, but I think it's a helpful item to kind of have sussed out a little bit. And of course, so often hearing someone say, I've been through that too, can be so powerful in building trust, making someone feel validated, making them feel like they're not alone. So there could actually be a lot of value in specializing in something that you have a personal connection with. The next thing to consider, I often don't hear too many people talk about when we're talking about niching down, finding a specialty and that sort of thing. And that is, do you find this topic inherently fascinating? Like, are you just so eager to learn as much as is out there on this particular topic? I think this is important regardless of a personal tie to a potential specialty or not, because, that's what makes us an expert or a specialist in this area, is that we're constantly seeking out whatever available information there is on a particular experience, topic, etc. So if you don't find it inherently interesting, fascinating, that you're wanting to constantly learn, it doesn't have to be constantly learn, but continuously, regularly want to stay up to date and learning about it, then at least it's worth reflecting on. Like, if there's something else that's way more interesting to you, that is worth exploring a bit more, in my opinion. Another question to consider is whether you experience a sense of hope for clients seeking support in this area. Some of us get interested in a specialty because we're more motivated by anger rather than hope. And it makes sense. The anger is fully valid and deserves to stay present, even as partly a motivator. But if anger becomes our primary motivator, then it can become dangerous. Then it feels like anger is the one driving a car, and an angry driver is a reckless driver, and we are kind of signing ourselves up for something to happen that's not good. But if instead we're primarily motivated by hope, to say, even if there's something deeply upsetting happening in this area of specialty, I have hope that my clients can move towards health, can find something that they're after, that I can support them somehow. And anger may very well be riding right there in the passenger seat, but if we have hope driving the car, then we can be much more confident that it's going to be a smooth and safe ride. And anger can offer its commentary as we go, and I'm sure it will. In fact, anger can offer some quite helpful wisdoms when appropriate. So I'm not trying to encourage you to write off anger, but we just want it to stay in the passenger seat while something much more stabilized is driving the car. And then we can filter through whatever the anger has to say and keep the things that align with the vision and goals of wherever you're headed with your clients. Now, a special consideration to note for those who are actively in the midst of the thing that they're connected with, that they're considering specializing in, it's important to ask how well managed that experience is and how potentially debilitating that experience is. Now, I'll say just because an experience is debilitating doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad idea to treat folks going through the same thing, but it is very important to assess for that. In some cases, it might be that you have a lifelong diagnosis, but it's very well managed, and in which case you might potentially be an ideal candidate to treat folks going through the same thing. And there might be some cases where you're navigating through, whether it's a diagnosis or a life experience or whatever it might be, where it is actively very debilitating, in which case it's worth considering, and I'd say consulting with other folks before making that a specialty. There are categories of life experiences that are quite debilitating, as in the case of, say, a chronic illness, but that might be either well managed or the mental health piece of it is well managed. So I don't want to just say that all things that are debilitating disqualify someone from specializing. However, if something is poorly managed as far as your mental well-being goes around that experience, I would strongly urge you to seek the advice and support of trusted colleagues or even a personal therapist before diving into that as a specialty. Now, as I go through these considerations, I know at least some people are going to be feeling this, so I'm going to repeat something that I now say in all of my videos where I talk about specialties, and that's that you don't have to lock in a specialty forever. Like you really, really don't. You can change your specialty. I haven't been in the career that long and I've already changed my specialty a couple different times. And I'm still here. I think it's fine that I did that personally. So I wouldn't want that narrative of, I need to land on my specialty and find the one I'm going to stick with for, 30 years or whatever it is to create an unnecessary pressure. Yeah, it's helpful to not change specialties, every 2 months for the rest of your career. That doesn't even make sense. We wouldn't do that. But, I've noticed I tend to kind of rotate through specialties maybe every 5 years or so, something like that. So if you can think of it as, what's something you might like to specialize in for the next kind of chunk of time in your career, and then you can always pivot. So if you realize it's not the best fit, pivot again, all good. Not too long ago, I made an episode sharing the somewhat long-winded journey of finding my current specialty. And I'll say current because it might just change again. That's fine. So I'll link to that below if you're curious to hear more. And a little bonus for you Extended Cut podcast listeners, I'll name part of my motivator for recording this episode is personally, I'm thinking about pivoting my specialty here, and I don't know, in just a bit. We'll see when, but these are some of the things I'm taking into consideration where I'm actively right now today going through something and reprocessing something that I experienced in a different light than how I made sense of it at the time. And I really would love to specialize in this in time, or, pivot an aspect of my specialty towards this in time. But I've been taking some of these things that I mentioned today into consideration and realizing like today is so not the day to make that pivot in my specialty for me, because I'm very much still trying to make sense of things. And so if I switch that piece of my specialty, started taking new clients, experiencing that, I am so aware that right now I'd be hearing their stories and like factoring it in actively, maybe not during session, but like after session, thinking like, oh, I wonder if that checks out with my experience and all of that. And that's not a place that I want to offer therapy from. So whenever this experience feels kind of more processed, more understood, more filed away, I'm reading the research on the topic, I'm reading people share their lived experiences, listening to podcasts, just consuming all the different types of professional and I guess casual, is that the right term? Content on this topic. And someday when it's past, I will, if it still fits, then I'll make that pivot. So that was the motivator for recording this episode. Like, oh, right. This is a little bit too close to home today. I'm not quite prepared to make the pivot in my specialty. And you'll notice I didn't even name what the thing is that I'm processing. I'm not even ready to kind of like announce it here because I'm still very much in it. So I'm sure I will bring you along for that journey whenever it actually happens. And also it means I'm going to tweak some stuff on my website, my marketing and stuff. So, I'll bring you along for that journey when it happens. But today's not the day and I don't know how long it'll be, but I'm just sharing that story so you feel permission to know like it's good to think about these things and consult on them and all of that. So if you're in a situation where you're considering specializing in a particular area that you have a personal connection with and you're just not sure if it's the best fit, if it makes sense, all of that, you could potentially just run through this list of things to consider, write down your answers, consider any remaining fears or questions that you might have lingering as well, write those down, and bring those to a trusted colleague, a consult group, or potentially even your personal therapy. And I'd like to emphasize, like, no need to rush this kind of decision. So really make sure you give it the attention and time it deserves, really parse it out, understand it well, and yeah, if it makes sense, down the road, you can always make it your specialty. So coming back to our initial question of, can you specialize in something that you personally relate to? I would say the official party stance for me is it depends. But what I will say is personally, when I go to look for a therapist for me, when I'm the client, I always feel so validated if I find even a sentence on their website that acknowledges some kind of direct tie to whatever sort of experience I might be looking for support with, or even other aspects, maybe it's not my immediate presenting issue that I need it to be aligned, but there's some aspect of my identity or my core experiences that I see acknowledged as, a shared identity or core experience that the client, that the therapist has, that can just immediately give me a sense of an exhale of like, okay, at least there's that piece. Doesn't mean that they're going to be the best therapist for me and all that, but that already eliminates a lot of questions and wonderings right off the bat. So it's worth keeping that in mind to know that for some clients and some specialties, that can be incredibly powerful right from the get-go to name an aspect of your shared experiences. Even with all that said, I'll repeat something I said earlier. Just because you might have a personal connection to something you specialize in, you don't have to disclose that connection if you choose not to, for whatever reasons. But if it makes sense to disclose a tidbit of it, sometimes it can be really helpful. And I'd also like to say, if you're specializing in something you have absolutely no direct experience with yourself personally or through a loved one or something like that, that is also absolutely okay, right? That also doesn't disqualify you from specializing in something. It's really important that we're just equipped and capable to support our clients going through what they're going through, whatever route we take to get there. So please don't hear everything that I just said and take it as like now you need to somehow have a specialty that you do have a personal connection with. They're just things to consider before, I don't know if there's more to say. Hopefully that came through. That it's okay. It's okay. Well, whatever your specialty, your interests, maybe you're not even specializing yet. You might be training or something else when you're thinking about your specialty someday. I hope this episode was supportive for you. I'd love to hear what sorts of things you take into consideration when identifying a specialty, or if you're already quite specialized, what factors motivated that specialty for you? Because I think it is just a different path for all of us, and I always find it so interesting to hear all the different paths we take. Well, I think I covered a lot of things here, so thanks for hanging with me. I hope you found it useful, and until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.